At the reading of the old man's will, his daughter laughed at me. Right there in the lawyer's office, in front of everybody, this elegant woman in a $1,000 suit looked at the handyman standing in the back in his work clothes. And when the lawyer got to the part where her father had left instructions about the car in the third bay, she just rolled her eyes and waved her hand and said, "Oh, give the old heap to the help. He's the only one sentimental enough to want it. Consider it your severance, Nate. Now, there's really no reason for you to come around anymore." And the room chuckled, and she smiled at her own cruelty. And I took the keys to a rusted-out old car that everybody in that room thought was junk. And I drove away. And I figured that was the end of my 15 years with the Hollis family. What that woman did not know, what nobody in that room knew, because not one of them had ever bothered to really look at it, was that the old heap rusting in the third bay was one of the rarest automobiles on the face of the earth, and that 14 months later it would sell at auction for $12 million. But before I tell you about the car and the auction and the phone call from that same woman when she found out, and oh, there was a phone call, I want to ask you something, and then I'll tell you everything. I know how this story sounds. I'd be skeptical too. So all I'll ask is this. Give me 20 minutes and let me tell you the whole thing, start to finish, and you can decide for yourself what kind of story it is. And if you're the sort of person who likes watching the right people finally win, quietly, years too late, but completely, then go ahead and hit subscribe and pull up a chair, because that's the only kind of story I tell. Now, let me tell you about Avery Hollis because none of this means anything without him. My name is Nate Conlon. I'm 44 years old, and for 15 of those years I worked for a man named Avery Hollis. My title, officially, was something like estate handyman, but that doesn't begin to cover it. I fixed what broke, I maintained the grounds, I kept the cars running. I did whatever needed doing on a big old property owned by a very wealthy old man. I'm good with my hands and good with engines, and Mr. Hollis hired me when I was a young man and kept me on for 15 years. And somewhere in those 15 years he stopped being my employer and became, though neither of us would have said it out loud, just about my best friend in the world. I'm a single dad, my boy Finn is 6. His mother left when he was a baby, and it's been him and me ever since, and Mr. Hollis, well, I'll get to what Mr. Hollis was to my boy. Let me first tell you who he was. Avery Hollis was old money, the real kind, the kind that goes back generations. But he wasn't like the rest of them, the country club crowd. Avery was a widower, his wife long gone, and he had one daughter, Sloan, who I'll tell you about, and who grew up to be exactly the kind of person the rest of his family was, which broke his heart in a quiet way he never spoke of. But Avery himself, Avery was different. Avery liked working people. He liked getting his hands dirty. The thing the rest of his fancy family could never understand about him was that the old man's one true joy in life, his great passion, the thing that lit him up, was not the money or the status or the parties. It was cars, old cars, and not the shiny show-off kind. He loved them the way you love a living thing, for their history, their craftsmanship, the hands that built them. He had a garage out behind the main house, 6 bays, and that garage was where Avery Hollis was happiest, in old coveralls with grease under his nails, and that garage was where he and I spent 15 years becoming friends, because I was the only one who shared it with him. His daughter thought his car thing was an embarrassing eccentricity, a rich old man playing in the dirt. His society friends humored it, but me, I loved it the way he did. So, for 15 years, Mr. Hollis and I spent our evenings and weekends in that garage, the two of us, working on his cars, talking about everything and nothing, and it was, for both of us, I think, the best part of either of our lives. He taught me about automobiles I'd only seen in books. I kept an old man company who was lonelier in that big house than anybody knew. We were a strange pair, the billionaire and the handyman, but down in that garage none of that existed. We were just two men who loved the same beautiful machines. I want to try to make you feel what those evenings were like, because they were the best hours of my life and I didn't even know it while they were happening, the way you never do. It would be getting on toward dark, my actual work done for the day, and instead of going home I'd find some reason to wander out to that garage and Avery would already be out there, his sleeves rolled up, the radio playing the old stuff, some part laid out on a clean rag in front of him. And he'd look up and say, "There he is. Hand me that 3/8, would you, Nate?" Like I'd been expected. Like the evening didn't really start until I got there. And we'd work, and we'd talk. He told me things in that garage I don't think he told another living soul. About his late wife, about the war he was in as a young man, about the loneliness of a big house and a family that only called when they wanted something. And I told him things too. About Finn's mother leaving. About the fear that lives in a single dad's chest at 3 in the morning. We were 40 years apart in age and about $1 billion apart in money, and none of it mattered one bit once the garage door rolled down and it was just us and the engines. I've thought about it a lot since. Most people go their whole lives and never have one friendship that pure. I got 15 years of one, with the unlikeliest man on earth, and I'll be grateful for it till the day I die. And there was one car, in the third bay, under a canvas cover where it had sat for as long as I'd worked there. It was, to look at it, the least impressive car in the whole garage. Old, the paint gone to primer and rust in places, the interior cracked and faded, tires flat, sitting on blocks. It looked, frankly, like a junker, like something you'd haul to the scrapyard. And the funny thing was, Avery never let me restore it. I offered 100 times. I'd say, "Mr. Hollis, let me bring that one in the third bay back to life. It's a shame to let her sit." And he'd always just smile, this little private smile, and say, "Not yet, Nate. That one's special. That one we leave just as she is, for now." And I figured it was sentimental, some car from his youth, and I let it be. I never knew what it really was. He never told me. And that, it turned out, was the old man being smarter than all of us. Now, let me tell you about Sloan Hollis, the daughter, because you need to understand her to understand the joke she thought she was playing. Sloan was Avery's only child, and she was everything Avery wasn't. Where he was warm, she was cold. Where he valued people for who they were, she valued them for what they were worth. She'd grown up in that big house and learned all the wrong lessons from all the wrong relatives, and by the time she was grown she looked at the world, and at her own father, with a kind of permanent faint contempt. She thought Avery was soft. She thought his love of cars and his friendship with his handyman were embarrassing. I'd hear her sometimes when she visited, which wasn't often. "Honestly, Daddy, you spend more time with the help than with your own family." She said the help like it tasted bad, and she looked at me, across the 15 years, like I was a piece of the furniture that had unfortunately learned to talk. I'll give you one example, because it tells you everything. A few years back, Avery threw a big party, some anniversary thing the family insisted on, and I was working it, keeping the generators and the lights running out back. And Avery, bless him, came and found me and dragged me inside to introduce me to some of his guests, his arm around my shoulder, proud as could be, saying, "This is Nate. This is my friend Nate, finest mechanic in the state." And I watched Sloan watch that, and I watched her face do a thing I'll never forget, this flush of pure embarrassment, not for me, but for him, for having to watch her father put his arm around the help and call him his friend in front of people who mattered. She actually pulled him aside afterward, and I heard a piece of it, her hissing, "Daddy, please, not in front of the Caldwells." Like I was something to be hidden. That was Sloan. To her, her father's warmth toward me wasn't a beautiful thing. It was a social liability. And the saddest part is she never once stopped to wonder what her father saw in me, that she couldn't. She just assumed he was being foolish. It never occurred to her that the foolish one might be her. And here's the part that mattered most to me. She didn't just look down on me, she looked down on her own father. She couldn't see what he was. She saw an eccentric old man wasting his time in a garage, when the truth was that Avery Hollis was the finest man I ever knew. She had a living treasure for a father, and she spent his whole life ashamed of him. And when he was dying, because he did get sick at the end, and it was slow, she came around exactly twice. Twice, in months. I was there every single day. I'd bring Finn, and the old man, who adored my boy, would light up like Christmas. Finn called him Mr. Avery, and the two of them would sit, and Avery would tell him about the cars, this dying old billionaire and a 4-year-old best friends. At the very end, when Avery couldn't get out to the garage anymore, I described the cars to him, bay by bay, so he could see them in his mind. His own daughter came twice. I tell you that, not to make myself look good, but because it matters for what came later, and for understanding why what she did at that Will reading landed the way it did. And I have to tell you about Avery and my boy, because it's the part that still gets me. When Finn was born and his mother left, I had no family to speak of, no help, just me and an infant and a job. And Avery Hollis, this billionaire, this old man who could have had anything, started treating my son like a grandson. He'd never gotten that from Sloan. No grandkids, no warmth, no Sunday dinners. And here came this little fatherless boy, and the old man just opened up his whole heart. He'd save up things to show Finn. He'd sit that toddler on a workbench and explain a carburetor to him in the most patient voice, like Finn was going to be quizzed on it. And Finn would nod along very seriously, and the two of them were ridiculous together, and I loved them both so much I could hardly stand it. Finn called him Mr. Avery. Avery called Finn partner. Hand partner the little wrench Nate, partner's going to help. A dying old rich man and a motherless toddler. Partners. So when I tell you Avery Hollis was the best man I ever knew, understand that he didn't just give me friendship. He gave my son the grandfather the boy didn't have. In the years a boy most needs one. There is no auction on earth that prices that. Because near the very end, Avery said something to me I didn't understand at the time. He was weak, and we were sitting quiet. And out of nowhere he gripped my hand and he said, "Nate, the car in the third bay. When I'm gone, that one's yours. I've seen to it. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. That old car is going to take care of the people who took care of me." And I thought he was just a dying man being sentimental, leaving his handyman an old junker he knew I'd cherish for his sake. I said, "I'll keep her forever, Mr. Hollis, I promise." And he smiled, that private smile again, and he said, "I know you will. That's why she's yours." And I had no idea, no earthly idea, what he'd just done for me and my boy. I thought he was giving me a memory. He was giving me a fortune. But he did it in a way where I'd only get it if I was the kind of man who'd have treasured the memory anyway. That was Avery. Right to the end, smarter than all of us. So Avery passed, and there was the funeral, which Sloan turned into a society event, and then there was the reading of the will, which is where we started. And I want to set that scene for you properly, because it's the hinge of everything. There I was, in the lawyer's office, in my good work clothes, which were still work clothes, surrounded by Hollis relatives in their finery who looked at me like I'd wandered in off the street. And the lawyer read through the will, the estate, the house, the money, the investments, all of it going to Sloan and the family, as expected. And then he got to a specific instruction. He said, "To Nate Conlon, in gratitude for his friendship, I leave the automobile in the third bay of the garage, and it is my express wish that he keep it." And that was when Sloan laughed. She thought it was the funniest, most pathetic thing she'd ever heard. Her father, leaving the handyman a broken-down old car. To her, it was perfect proof of everything she'd always believed, that her father was a sentimental old fool, and I was a charity case he'd kept around. "Oh, give the old heap to the help," she said. "Consider it your severance, Nate." And the cruelty of it, the public little knife of it, was that she was using her father's last kindness to me as a way to humiliate me and get rid of me in the same breath. She thought she was handing me garbage and calling it a paycheck. She thought she was the one with all the power in that room, doling out scraps to the help. And here's the thing about a moment like that. When somebody humiliates you in a room full of people who agree with them, you have about 1 second to decide who you're going to be. You can match it, get loud, get angry, defend your dignity out loud, and they'll just nod to each other, see, that's exactly what those people are like. Or you can swallow it, which feels like losing, and walk out with your back straight and let them think they won. I've been the help my whole life. I know that second well, and the thing the Sloans of the world never understand is that the quiet swallowing isn't weakness, and it isn't defeat. It's a man deciding that their opinion of him isn't worth the breath it would take to argue with. I didn't stay quiet in that office because I was beaten. I stayed quiet because Avery Hollis raised the level of my whole life for 15 years, and I wasn't going to dishonor him by brawling with his daughter over his casket. So I took the keys, and I thanked them, and I walked out, and every person in that room got to feel a little superior watching me go. I let them have it. It cost me nothing. It turned out to be the most expensive free thing those people ever gave away. The only thing I said on my way out was, "Thank you." He was a good man. And behind me, I could hear them, a little, still chuckling about the handyman and his junk car, and I drove home stinging, I won't lie to you. Not because of the car. I'd have treasured that car if it was nothing but a rusted shell, because it was Avery's, and he wanted me to have it. I was stinging because of how she'd done it. Because she'd taken the last gift of the best man I ever knew and turned it into a joke at my expense, and because she'd never, not once in 15 years, seen either her father or me as anything but things beneath her. I had Finn with me in the truck on the drive home. He'd been in the waiting room with a sitter, and he could tell I was quiet, and he asked, "Did we get Mr. Avery's special car, Daddy?" And I looked over at my boy, and something loosened in my chest, and I said, "Yeah, partner, we sure did." And just like that, the sting went out of it, because Finn had it exactly right, the way kids do. We hadn't been handed a joke. We'd been handed Mr. Avery's special car. Sloan could keep her laughing and her superiority. We had the car the old man wanted us to have. That was the whole truth of it, and my 6-year-old saw it clearer than a room full of rich grown-ups ever could. I had that car towed to my little place, and I put it in my garage, and for a while, honestly, I just kept it covered, because looking at it made me miss the old man too much. Finn would ask about it. "Is that Mr. Avery's special car?" And I'd say, "Yeah, buddy, that's Mr. Avery's special car," and we'd leave it at that. Now, here's how the truth came out. A few months later, I finally decided I was ready to do what Avery would have wanted, which was to lovingly restore that old car as a tribute to him. I figured I'd do it right, slow, in my spare time, the way he and I would have done it together. So I started the first step of any proper restoration, which is to really study the car, document it, research it, figure out exactly what you've got, and I started looking into it. The badges, the numbers stamped in the chassis, the few details I could make out under all that rust and primer. And the deeper I dug, the more my hands started to shake. Because that old heap, that junk car, that car Sloan Hollis laughed about handing to the help, it was a 1937 Alfa Romeo. And not just any Alfa Romeo. It was one of a tiny handful of a specific legendary model ever built, the kind of pre-war, handcrafted, coach-built masterpiece that serious collectors spend their whole lives hunting for and never find, the kind of car that sits in the great museums of the world. And the chassis number, when I finally cleaned it up and read it and researched it, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. with my heart pounding, the chassis number matched a car that the collector world had thought was lost. Gone. Vanished decades ago. One of the great missing cars. And it had been sitting under a canvas cover in the third bay of Avery Hollis's garage for who knows how many years, while his daughter called it junk and I dusted around it. I want you to sit in that kitchen with me at 2 a.m, because I have never felt anything like it before or since. I'd been reading for hours, going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, comparing the numbers I'd cleaned up off that chassis against the records, the registries, the histories the collector world keeps. And at first, I thought I had to be wrong. I thought, "Nate, you're a handyman, you're tired, you're seeing what you want to see because you miss the old man. Cars like this don't sit in a garage in our town," but the numbers kept matching. And matching. And then I found the old photograph, a grainy black and white from before the war, of that exact car, gleaming and new, and I held it up next to a photo I'd taken of the rusty heap in my garage, and it was the same car. The same car. And my hands started to shake so bad I had to put the coffee down. Because I understood all at once, sitting alone in my kitchen in the middle of the night, that everything was about to change. That my boy's whole future had just rewritten itself. That the old man hadn't left me a memory. He'd left me a miracle, and disguised it as a memory, so that only love would ever unwrap it. I didn't sleep that night, I just sat with it, And somewhere in there I started talking out loud to Avery, asking him how long he'd known, and I swear I could feel him laughing. Avery had known. Of course he'd known, that's why he never let me restore it, because in its untouched, unrestored, original state, a car like that is even more valuable, more precious to collectors, than a shiny restored one. That one we leave just as she is. He knew exactly what it was. He'd probably found it, or quietly bought it, decades ago, and kept it as his great secret, his private joy. And he'd left it to me, the handyman, the one person who'd loved his garage the way he did. That old car is going to take care of the people who took care of me. He wasn't being sentimental, he was being literal. He knew precisely what he was giving me. I sat at that kitchen table and I cried and I laughed and I cried some more because the old man had reached out from beyond the grave and changed my whole life and my son's whole life, and he'd done it in a way so quiet and so perfect that only a man who truly knew and loved him would ever have received it. If I'd been the kind of person who took one look at that rusty car and sold it for scrap, or refused the junk out of pride, I'd have gotten nothing. He'd built the gift so that only the right man could receive it. And the right man was me. Me and my Finn. I had the car authenticated by the experts, the real ones, the world authorities on these automobiles. And they confirmed it. And I'll tell you, those serious reserved men got emotional looking at that car, because to them it was a holy grail, a lost piece of history come back from the dead. And then, on their advice, I did the thing you do with a car like that. I took it to one of the great international auctions, the kind where the rarest cars in the world change hands. And that 1937 Alfa Romeo, Avery's old heap, the handyman's severance, the junk in the third bay, sold at auction for $12 million. $12 million. I was there, in the room, when it happened. I'd never been anywhere like it. A grand hall full of the wealthiest collectors in the world, and up on the block, under the lights, Avery's car, cleaned up just enough to show but left original the way he'd wanted. And the auctioneer started, and the numbers started climbing, and they climbed past anything I could comprehend. 1 million, 3, 5, and still going, these subtle nods and raised paddles from men who buy history for a hobby. And I sat there in my one good suit with my heart going like a hammer, watching the price of my friend's old heap climb toward the sky. And when that hammer finally came down at $12 million, the room actually applauded, the way they do for a great car, and I just put my face in my hands. Because I was the only person in that whole glittering room who knew that the truly valuable thing about that car had never been the $12 million. It was a lonely old man in a garage who'd found one friend and said thank you in the only language big enough to hold what he felt. Everybody in that hall was applauding a car. I was crying for a man, now. You want to know about the phone call? Because of course Sloan found out. A car selling for $12 million at a major auction is news, and the provenance, the story, came out. The lost Alfa Romeo, discovered in the estate of the late Avery Hollis, left to his longtime handyman. And Sloan Hollis, who had laughed at me in that lawyer's office, who had called it junk and called it my severance and told me there was no reason to come around anymore, Sloan saw that headline. And she called me. And I want to tell you, I had imagined that phone call. I'm a human being. In the months of restoring and researching and authenticating, when I started to understand what I had, I'd be lying if I said I never once pictured the look on her face. But when the call actually came, it didn't feel the way I thought it would, because she was a wreck. She wasn't angry, or not mostly. She was undone. She'd done the math, you see. She'd realized that her father had left a $12 million car specifically and pointedly to the handyman she despised, and had left it in a way that made his feelings about her perfectly, devastatingly clear. He had a treasure, and he gave it to me, and not to her, and she knew exactly why. Because I'd loved him, and she hadn't. Because I'd shown up every day, and she'd shown up twice. Her father, from beyond the grave, had told her exactly what she was worth to him compared to the help she looked down on, and the answer was written in $12 million numbers in an auction catalog for the whole world to see. She said, "Was it, Nate, did you know? Did he know? Did the two of you?" And she couldn't even finish. And I told her the truth. I said, "No, Sloan, I didn't know. He never told me what it was. He just told me to keep it, and not to let anybody talk me out of it. I'd have kept it if it was worth $10 because it was his. That's the part you never understood about your dad. That's the part that makes the car worth $12 million and makes you." And I stopped myself because there was no kindness in finishing that sentence, and the old man wouldn't have wanted me to. There was a long silence on the phone. And then she said, very quietly, in a voice I'd never heard from her, "He liked you better than me. My own father liked the handyman better than his own daughter." And I could have agreed with her. It was true, and she'd earned it. But Avery wouldn't have wanted that either. So instead, I said the truest kind thing I could find. I said, "Sloan, your father didn't like me better than you. Your father loved you your whole life and spent most of it wishing you'd just come down to the garage and sit with him. The car wasn't him choosing me over you. The car was him giving the one thing he loved most to the one person who loved it too. You could have been that person. He'd have given anything for you to be that person. The door was open the whole time. You just never walked through it." And she cried then, really cried, and I understood that this was the most honest moment Sloan Hollis had ever had, standing in the ruins of how she'd treated her own father, finally seeing it, $12 million too late. She asked me, before she hung up, if she could come see the car before it sold, and I want you to know I almost said no. There was a hardness in me that wanted to tell her she'd had a treasure for a father her whole life and never once came to the garage, so why should she get to see the car now? But then I thought about what Avery would do, and Avery would never in 1,000 years have turned his own daughter away from one last look at the thing he loved. So I said yes, and she came, and she stood in front of that car for a long, long time, not saying anything, and I watched something break open in her that I think had been sealed shut her whole life. She reached out and put her hand on the hood, very gently, the way you'd touch something holy, or something you'd lost. And she said, so quiet I almost didn't hear it, "He used to ask me to come out to the garage, every time I visited, and I always said I was too busy." And she started to cry, standing there with her hand on her dead father's car, finally understanding that all those invitations to the garage hadn't been about the cars at all. They'd been her father, over and over for years, asking his daughter to come spend time with him, and she'd said no every single time. The car didn't make her rich. It made her see. And I think in the end that was worth more to her than any inheritance, even though it was the most painful thing that ever happened to her. Some gifts hurt going in. That doesn't make them less of a gift. Now let me tell you what I did with the money, because it's the part that matters, and it's the part Avery would have cared about. I want to be honest with you. I took it. All of it. I didn't refuse it. I didn't give it all away in some grand gesture because Avery Hollis gave that car to me and my boy on purpose, with full knowledge of what it was worth, and refusing it would have been throwing his last and greatest kindness back in his face. He didn't spend his final strength arranging that gift so I could nobly turn it down. He gave it to me so my son would never want for anything. So I took it, and I thanked the old man every single day for it, and I do still. But here's what taking it actually meant. It meant my Finn will go to any college he wants. It meant I will never again lie awake doing math at the kitchen table. But it also meant something the old man would have loved even more. I took a big piece of that money and I bought a property and I built a garage on it, a real one, 6 bays like Avery's, and I turned it into a place where kids from families like the one I grew up in can come and learn to work on cars. For free. Kids who'd never otherwise get within a mile of a beautiful machine, learning the craft, the history, the love of it, the way Avery taught me. I named it the Hollis Garage, after him, so that the name of the man his own family was ashamed of is now over the door of a place that's changing kids' lives, and his real passion, the thing they all mocked, lives on and does good in the world long after he's gone. I think about the symmetry of it sometimes, and it about knocks me over. Avery Hollis spent his life being quietly ashamed of by people who shared his blood and his name and his money. And now there are kids, dozens of them, kids with no money and no fancy name, kids the world has already started writing off the way it writes off all poor kids, who say the name Hollis with pure love, because the Hollis garage is the best thing in their week, the place a grown-up is glad to see them and teaches them something real with patience and respect. The name his own family treated like an embarrassment is now a name a bunch of overlooked kids will carry warm in their hearts their whole lives. That's a kind of justice you can't get from a courtroom. The old man got the last word, and the last word was good, and it'll keep being good long after everybody who ever looked down on him is forgotten. And Finn, my Finn, who's 6 now and was 4 when his friend Mr. Avery died. Finn spends his Saturdays at the Hollis garage, helping, which at 6 means handing out the wrong tools and being adored by everybody. And sometimes he'll stand in front of the photo of Avery I hung on the wall, and he'll tell the other kids, very seriously, "That's Mr. Avery. He was my friend. He gave us a special car." And he has no idea, my boy, that the special car is the reason for everything around him. To him, it's just true the way the sky is true. Mr. Avery was his friend, and Mr. Avery gave us a special car, which is, when you strip away the $12 million, exactly and completely what happened. I still can't quite believe the shape of it. A lonely, old rich man, mocked by his own family, found one person in 15 years who loved what he loved and saw him for what he was. A handyman, of all people, the lowest status person in his whole world. And he reached out from beyond death and lifted that handyman and his motherless boy clean out of their hard little life, and he did it with the very thing his family was most ashamed of, and he did it so quietly and so perfectly that only love could have received it. Sloan had everything, the name, the money, the house, the blood. And she ended up with all of it except the one thing that turned out to matter, which was her father's true heart, and that he gave to me because I was the only one who ever wanted it. I think about that a lot. Everybody in that lawyer's office thought the valuable things were the house and the money and the investments, and that the junk was the old car and the old man's friendship with the help. And it turned out it was exactly backwards. The house and the money were just money. The junk, the old car nobody respected, and the friendship nobody valued. That was the treasure the whole time. It usually is. The world is so bad at telling the difference, and it breaks my heart how often the Sloans of the world only figure it out when it's $12 million and one dead father too late. So, here's what I'll leave you with. There's an Avery Hollis in a lot of lives, some overlooked, undervalued person that the important people walk right past, that the world has decided doesn't count. An old man in a garage, a handyman, the help, and there's usually a quiet treasure in those relationships that the proud people never see, because they're too busy looking at the house and the money to notice the gold sitting right in front of them under a canvas cover. Don't be a Sloan. Go down to the garage, sit with the old man, walk through the door while it's open, because some doors close and some of them don't open again, and you'd be amazed what's waiting on the other side of the ones the proud people never bother to walk through. That night, the car sold. After Finn was in bed, I went out to my own garage and I sat with a cup of coffee in the quiet, the way Avery and I used to, and I talked to the old man a while. I told him it worked. I told him I'd kept her just like he said, and that she took care of us, just like he promised, and that his name was going over a door where it would do some good. And I swear to you, sitting in that quiet garage, I could just about hear him, that little private smile in his voice saying, "I know, Nate, that's why she was yours." If you've got an Avery in your life, somebody the world overlooks but you know better, tell me about them down in the comments. Tell me who saw you when nobody else did, or who you almost walked right past before you knew what they were worth. I read every one, and those are the names I hold on to. And if you'll ride along with me a while, the next story's already warming up in the next bay over. No need to say anything, just leave the subscribe on your way in and find a seat. Trust me, it's a good one.